Hi, everyone. Welcome to our virtual CU Anschutz alumni series, Happy and Healthy Hour. We are grateful that you are here with us today to connect with the CU Anschutz alumni community and to learn from our amazing network of experts at the CU Anschutz Medical Campus. My name is Debbie Gallegos, and I'm a 2010 graduate of the School of Pharmacy. I am proud to represent the CU Pharmacy Alumni Association. For those of you joining us tonight who are alumni of the CU School of Pharmacy, the Alumni Association offers many opportunities to connect with your fellow alumni and current students. In fact, we are hosting our annual Alumni Award event this Friday night, where we will honor 3 extraordinary alumni of the CU Pharmacy program. Our alumni office also has numerous ways for all alumni from the campus to get engaged. Our alumni team is always happy to help connect you with activities for your college or school. We will share more at the end of this evening's events on upcoming activities and how to reach the alumni team. Before I introduce tonight's expert, I want to draw your attention to the Q&A and chat functions on the bottom of your screen. We have time designated at the end of the presentation for a question and answer session with our presenter. Please enter a question at any time in the Q&A function, and we will be sure to address it at the end of the program. Additionally, if you are using the chat function, please know that you can send your message to be visible to just the host or to all attendees. We have alumni team members available on the chat if you need anything during tonight's presentation. So now, without further ado, I have the privilege of introducing tonight's speaker. Dr. Aimee Bernard is a PhD immunologist with specific expertise in human B-cell development and the autoimmune disease lupus. In her role as an educator, Aimee shares her knowledge and passion for immunology with a variety of students across the CU Anschutz Medical Campus. In her role as a pro-science advocate, Aimee regularly testifies in support of common sense, pro-science public health legislation. In her role as a science communicator, Aimee is a co-director for the Colorado Clinical and Translational Sciences Institute, or CCTSI. She is on the Communicating Your Science to the Public workshop series. In all her roles, Aimee strives to serve as a positive influence on education, public health policy, and science communication. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Bernard. I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Hello, thanks for having me. So thanks for the invitation, and to everyone out there, thank you for attending. I can't see any of your faces, but I'll know that you're there. All right, I'm going to get started here. All right, so thanks for tuning in. The title of this webinar was New Year, New Life Hacks. Don't believe everything you read. And then we'll have a bonus where we'll talk a little bit about how you can engage in conversation with people that may be led astray by mis or disinformation. All right, tried to bring up my laser pointer here. All right, so let's get started. So part 1, don't believe everything you read. So how do you distinguish between facts and fake news? One of the ways that I was kind of announcing this webinar to friends and family and colleagues was that this might help you prepare for the holiday dinner table. If you are in science or healthcare profession or medicine, I'm sure that there are people, friends, family, neighbors who might share or discuss fake news with you. And sometimes the holiday dinner table or conversations around the holidays can be a little contentious. So I'm going to give you some tips and tricks for distinguishing between facts and fake news. And then we'll talk about how to have respectful and civil conversations with people who share or debate with you about the facts versus fake news. So let's dive in. So I first wanted to start with an example. As an immunologist and someone who is embedded daily in science communication and medical communication, I am always looking on social media. And there are a lot of examples on social media where you might see things that raise a bit of an alarm. So this is an example. I found this on a Eating Well website, and it talks about 7 sneaky signs that you have leaky gut syndrome, according to a dietitian. And as you can see on this slide, this is a screenshot of the article. It gives you the name of the author, who reviewed it, and it also on the right-hand side, it tells you a couple of things that are in this article, like to be aware of if you have chronic gut problems, if your skin is irritated and inflamed, maybe you have some allergies to certain foods or reactivities. Maybe you have joint pain or you're more tired than usual. Maybe you feel anxious or depressed. And then the bottom one here was having an autoimmune disease. So this is quite a long list of things that might be discussed in this article. And then I also wanted to draw your attention to the artwork. As you can see, this is like a section of a gastrointestinal tract, a cartoon. We're looking at your stomach and this kind of red signaling, and these kind of lightning bolts would maybe suggest some damage or danger. So again, 7 sneaky signs listed here on the right that you might have leaky gut syndrome. So I thought we would kind of go through this together. Let's see. My computer is not responding to me. Let's see. There we go. Okay, so a couple of snippets from the article asking you, is your gut leaking? This is probably not a question you get asked often. You're not a pipe or a faucet, things that you would normally see leaking. But similar to a leaking pipe, your gut can be damaged and have some permeability. That seems a little bit alarming. And then here in the other snippet, although leaky gut syndrome is not recognized by all medical professionals, the passage of unwanted substances, and then it keeps going on. This is an important clue. So I've drawn your attention to this because this saying that this is not recognized by all medical professionals, I'm glad that this was written in the article. But this should also draw your attention. You should maybe start to be just a little bit skeptical. Like, what? I wonder what that means. All right. So I'm going to draw your attention now to another piece of information that I found on social media. And this comes from the Unbiased Science podcast. And this is also talking about leaky gut. And what they're saying here is that leaky gut is a term that's used by the wellness industry. So this would be like the conglomeration of all these different commercial entities that are invested in wellness and selling you things regarding wellness and health. And this is a term that's often used by the wellness industry as a diagnosis for a range of non-specific symptoms. Remember, we had that long list of 7. While they are specific, it's quite a lengthy and kind of not really cohesive unit of symptoms. So they're trying to tell you here now, this is not a valid medical diagnosis. Intestinal cells undergo changes in permeability or leakiness. They're dynamic, they move around. They will allow nutrients and fluids and even immune cells, the body's built-in mobile defense system, to be transported across the intestinal wall to move into the gut. And this is something that is healthy and normal. I'll give you an analogy. If you think of our bodies, we are essentially built around a tube. From our mouth to the very end, we are a tube where we ingest, we eat, we drink, we breathe things in. So our body is built around this tube. And what's really important is for oxygen and nutrients to pass from like the lungs and the intestines. Things do need to move from that inner part of the tube into the body. So leakiness is actually kind of part of how things work. So this leaky gut syndrome, this kind of concept where the gut becomes overly permeable has been manipulated by the wellness industry. So why would I want you to believe maybe this information? Why would this be more credible than the previous source? And I'll tell you why. Unbiased Science, this organization was founded by credible scientists in the realm of science and public health. So Jessica Steyer is a public health expert. Andrea Love is a PhD immunologist. They have science training, health profession training, and they provide science, evidence-based science in their posts. And then if we compare that to the first author that we saw on the Eating Well article with the seven sneaky signs, this author, Davini Lingo, this is a registered dietitian nutritionist. This is absolutely a real degree, but it is not a medical degree. It's not a rigorously trained scientific degree. This person would absolutely have information about nutrition and diets, but leaky gut, or the way that intestines work in a healthy or non-healthy way, would not necessarily be in the realm of expertise for this individual. So this was an example of walking through kind of like a health hack potentially, or something that's trying to make you think that you might have a health issue. So we're going to talk about another example, and then we're going to dive into some tips and tricks for distinguishing facts from fake news. So this is another example. This is not from the wellness industry. This would be this report. We'll read this report here in a second, but it is more about recommendations. So the Borowitz report. This came out November 20th, so not that long ago in the last month. And the title of this report is the American Medical Association, or the AMA, recommends patients go to Canada. So patients that are in the United States go to Canada. Well, that's a little bit alarming. So let's read the report together. All right, so here it is. Out of Washington, the Borowitz report. In an advisory issued on Wednesday, the AMA urged U.S. patients seeking medical attention to go to Canada. Starting at the end of January, Americans should schedule even the most routine medical appointments north of the border. Dr. Harland Dorenson, who is the president of the AMA. Dr. Dorenson further observed that recently announced changes to the nation's healthcare establishment, or maybe upcoming changes, had already impacted Wall Street with a boom for companies that are selling supplements such as coffee bean extract, raspberry ketones, horse dewormer, and leeches. Well, this is pretty alarming. So when you read something like that, I'm going to encourage everyone to be skeptical. Being skeptical is how probably most of you already think as scientists or healthcare professionals. We need to be skeptical of what we read. So what questions come to mind when we read something like this? Well, let's see. What do we know about the Borowitz report? What do we know about the American Medical Association? And last, is Dr. Harland Dorenson the current AMA president? These are all questions we should think about as we're reading through that report. I also wanted to tell you that that report was sent to me by email by a friend of my family. All right. So what do we know about the Borowitz report? Well, I did a little digging on the internet, and I found that the Borowitz report is a humor and satire source. that was a little relieving. And this came from a company called All Sides, and they look at media bias and they rate it. So the Borowitz report is a satirical news column started back in 2001, and it's really fake news headlines. Now, if you were not familiar with that, you might this might call alarm to you. Like I'm scared of having to go need the need to go to Canada for all my health care, all of my care for my health. So where did I get this information? Well, All Sides is a company that I'm a little bit familiar with because I do a lot of internet searches to see if things are, accurate or credible. And it's actually a company that is meant to strengthen democratic societies. They look for how balanced news is and they look at media bias ratings. Um, and they will rate things as being a little bit to the right or neutral or left. They will let you know the kind of status of the information and if it's balanced or not. So it's a source that's trying to help us decipher that type of information. So the next question was, what do we know about the AMA? Well, the AMA was founded a long time ago. It's so 1847, the largest and only national association that brings together a lot of state and specialty medical societies for critical stakeholders like healthcare professionals, physicians, and the like. And it's always followed its mission to promote science and medicine for the betterment of public health. And the AMA is a reputable organization. Our last question was, is Dr. Harland Dorenson the current AMA president? The answer is no. This person is Dr. Bruce Scott, the current president, 2024 to 2025. So Harlan Dorenson is not the president. And when I looked it up, I couldn't even find I couldn't even find that person was actually a physician or affiliated with AMA. So these are all questions that are really important for us to think about and then further investigate when you are trying to distinguish facts from fake news. So the verdict here is that this is fake and that now we all know that the Borowitz report is a satirical news report that is not meant to be taken as real. So we went through two examples together tonight, but now we're going to talk about some tips and tricks to distinguish fact from fake news. So what can you do, or what can you do to help others that you know, family, friends, people in your community, make sense of science and health information? So this is actually an article that I wrote in the St. Paul Pioneer Press back in September of 2022. It was an opinion article or op-ed, a guest commentary, where I offered tips for assessing health information on the internet. And this was in response to something I had read that was a letter to the editor, just a little kind of sliver, a little mini paragraph, where someone had written in and was promoting fake news that was relevant to public health and the pandemic. And I wrote I would say, I don't know if scathing is the right word, but a very stern email to the editor and said, this concerns me. Is it possible that we could work together to try to help people assess science and health information on the internet? And the editor, we went back and forth for quite a while, and it turned into this. So I've put the link down here below, but we're going to walk through this together. And the idea was, this is coming from an immunologist who wants to help others assess science and health information on the internet. And one of the main reasons I was motivated to do that is I know how challenging it is to decipher facts from fake news. There are a lot of things that are written as if they are real, and I know that it can take people in. So I really want to help people with my expertise be able to determine fact from fake news. So that's where this came from. So the big question is, how can you find information that comes from credible sources and experts who are sharing their expertise and knowledge to empower you? to help you make decisions based on facts and truth. Because that's what we all want to do. We all want to make the best decisions possible for ourselves and for our family and for our community. So here are the 4 quick tips, and we're going to walk through all of them individually. So we'll look at emotions, we'll check the author, we'll look at the sources, and we'll check references. Okay, so for the first one, check emotions. Does what you read or watched, like if it's a video, make you feel strong emotions? It's the first thing to think about. Fake news is often created to spark strong emotion, fear, anger, maybe intense sadness. Strong emotions are often the result of reading fake news. Trustworthy articles should give you the information and let you decide how you feel about it. It shouldn't kind of force your emotions one way or the other. Science is very fact-based, and I think some people, not me, would maybe even say boring. So it would not spark strong emotion. Another thing that fake news often does is it suggests revealing information that the science or medical establishment did not want the public to know. So it's kind of like they often will phrase it as if it's a secret. Like, this is what the professionals don't want you to know, but I am telling you this. So the desired outcome is to inspire strong emotion against science or the medical establishment, but to trust the messenger who's letting you in on that secret. So second tip here, check the author. Is the author an expert in the field? Does the author have experience or training in the area for which she or he is writing about? This is a really important aspect because we live in a time where anyone can publish things on the internet or social media. So the beauty of this is that anyone can publish information, but the detriment is that anyone can publish information. So anyone can write anything. So checking to see if they're an expert is important. So you can use the internet to look up the author. You can find out if the author is affiliated with an institution or a certain business. You can look those institutions and businesses up to see if they're legitimate, if they're real. You can also use the internet. You can use information to see, is there consensus or agreement among this person, like what they're saying, and other leading experts in the field. I sometimes will have people ask me, well, so-and-so wrote this. And I will say, well, that doesn't sound, evidence-based to me. And they'll say, well, this person has a medical degree. And I'm like, okay, maybe they do. I can look the person up. But is this something that they're saying that's kind of wild and crazy and out there? Or is this consensus among hundreds, if not thousands, of people in the same field? So consensus sometimes is something important to look for. Okay, source. So tip 3, check the source. Is this a reputable source? Is this a source that scientists or doctors would use themselves to gain and or share information? So I've listed a couple of sources here. YouTube, a lot of videos. Your local newspaper, so the Denver Post, or like I mentioned earlier, the Twin Cities Pioneer Press. Maybe social media. A lot of young people, like college-age individuals and younger, will get all of their news from social media. So things like X, that used to be Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Blue Sky, Threads, you name it. All these different social media channels. Scientific journals or textbooks, academic or medical institutions. These are all examples. Like, as a scientist myself, I do not go to YouTube first. I do not go to social media first. I will go to scientific journals or textbooks. I will often also go to academic or medical institutions. One of my first stops is the CDC, Centers for Disease Control. You can also go to like the Mayo Clinic, There are a lot of other reputable hospitals like CU Anschutz. There are all kinds of places that you can look. That's where scientists and physicians would go. Now, some of us might post things on social media, like little snippets of science information. Some scientists will make videos on YouTube. I'm not saying that these aren't sources of credible information, but it shouldn't be your first stop, and they're not necessarily reputable. Okay, so that's just some examples. All right, let's look at the fourth tip. Check the references. Does the article or video share references for the information that was in that content? Does the author list references? I'm going to say big red flag if no references are listed. That can sometimes be a big red flag. That might mean that there are no references because it's not true. It might be fake news. If there are references listed, what are they and where do they come from? And then something I wanted to talk to you about today is something called a preprint. Most of you have probably heard of preprints, but I wanted to talk to you about preprints and the process of peer review in science. So preprints, this is an article. It's a science article, but it's kind of like their final draft that it's put out into the world um, as a communication of scientific findings. But it has not yet been validated, and it has not been reviewed by other science experts through the process that we call peer review. And we'll talk about peer review here in just a second, but preprints, again, are kind of like a final draft of scientific findings that is put out into the internet right away. And often it's submitted to a journal at the same time. And then that journal, as we'll talk about here on the next slide, there'll be a lot peer review that will happen. But a preprint has not yet been validated, but it's just it's a quick way to get scientific findings out into the world and to share with other scientists. But it's important to know that they have not yet undergone intense scrutiny and that these should not be accepted as fact. So what you're probably wondering is, why do we have these things? Well, first of all, peer review is this big deal in science. It's a process by which we determine if the scientific findings in the article are fact or fake news. So if you submit your scientific findings in an article, like a final draft of an article to a journal, that journal will find a number of science experts in the same field as the authors of the paper, but science experts that were not part of the study at all. And they will ask those experts to read the paper and scrutinize the data and determine if the findings in the paper are true or if they're facts. So this is the process of peer review. So preprints must undergo this rigorous peer review. And only those that go on to publication in an actual scientific journal would then prevail as fact. So you're wondering, why do preprints exist? Well, they became very popular during the early phase of the pandemic. And this was really important during the pandemic because preprints were a very valuable source of information to the scientific and medical community. Now, the peer review process, while it's incredibly important, one thing I didn't mention is it's very time consuming. So you have to submit it to the journal. The journal has to review it and tell you, oh, we think we'd like to review this. That usually takes, I don't know, weeks to months. They then have to find science experts in the same field. Those science experts have to agree to review it. They then scrutinize it. They write comments. Sometimes it's then suggested that you make edits to it. And by that point in time, it's several months, if not a year, have passed. Well, during a pandemic, we did not have the luxury of time. So scientists decided to share their findings as they were doing their studies on the COVID virus and how it replicated, how it worked, all these different things, and putting them out in preprints. And what's the beauty of preprints is because I am trained as a scientist and I have reviewed other people's articles and I have rigorous training in scientific method. I could read some preprints and I would look at some of the preprints and I would say, no, I don't know that this is actually, I'm not sure we should publish this. I'm not sure this will be published. Now, some of those preprints never did make it into the evidence-based stacks of publications because some of them just weren't good enough science. Now, some did make it, but again, it was for someone like me or other scientists, some of you, you would be able to read that and understand, but there are a lot of people that don't. So a lot of people in the community will come to me with preprints and say, well, what do you think about this? And that is something that I then engage in a conversation. If it seems like they're truly interested, but I'll give them my understanding of preprints and why they exist, and that why we shouldn't count them as fact until they're published in an actual journal. But I just wanted to put that out there because I do see preprints referenced quite a bit. Typically by people who are not scientists, and sadly, I also see a lot of preprints that are referenced in legislation. So anyways, just kind of food for thought with that. Okay, so going back to our original question, how can you find information that comes from credible sources and experts who are sharing their expertise to help you or empower you to make the best decisions for you and your family based on facts and truth? So just a quick review of those 4 tips. Check emotions, check the author, check the source, check the references. So that's what I would do for that. And again, just bringing you back, if you want to, you can look at the Twin Cities Pioneer Press back to September 25th of 2022. I think, it was also printed in other locations as well, like other electronic like media sources picked it up. So you can probably find it in multiple locations, but I'd check this out if you want. It's a big, it's quite lengthy. So, but either way, it boils down to those 4 tips. Okay, now just to make sure that I know what I'm talking about, I wanted to show you some other sets of criteria. This comes from the Journal of Science. This is probably the premier journal in all of in all of science. They actually call it the Science Magazine, but it is the Journal of Science. And I just wanted to show you this. They call it the fast and frugal heuristic, so kind of like a cheat sheet to figure out if something is real or fake. Is the source of this info credible? No, reject. Yes, keep going. Does the source have expertise to vouch for the claim? No, reject the source. Yes, keep going. Last question, is there consensus among relevant science experts? Yes, you can accept. No, you might want to look at uncertainty, but this is just another way of determining. And this is the last other example that I will give you, another set of criteria. This is mostly because I wanted to call your attention to the News Literacy Project. They have a lot of really good information for distinguishing fact from fake news. And I'm not going to go through this whole checklist with you, but you could certainly look this up at newslit.org. But this is kind of a checklist for if there's breaking news, something that you read that's like, oh, kind of alarming or grabs your attention. Here are 6 things. So there are 6 here that you could to do to try to figure out, is this fact or fake news? And again, this is a really good source of information for a variety of kind of like literacy, fact versus fake news. Okay, so now that we're experts in distinguishing fact from fake news, this brings us to the part 2 of our webinar here. And this is how to talk to people about misinformation and disinformation when it challenges science and facts. And I know that this can be hard. It can be difficult as a scientist to talk to people about things that challenge evidence and what we know. So I thought this was kind of funny. I do have a mental illness that makes me think that people will change their minds if I present them with factual information and data. I'm going to tell you what, that mental illness, most scientists have this illness. It's just not true. If we present people, reasonable people or unreasonable people with facts and data, doesn't always work. So we're going to go through some tips and tricks here of a guide of how to try to have respectful and civil conversation with people that may be sharing things with you or debating things with you that are not based in science or evidence. Okay, so before we go there, I wanted to clarify what misinformation and disinformation is. They're they're similar but different. So misinformation is the unintentional spread of fake news, false or misleading information. So it's sometimes shared by mistake, or it's shared by someone who is reading it and actually fully believes that it's true. So this is unintentional. They may be sharing it intentionally, but they're not, if they believe it's true, they're not trying to share fake news. They're actually sharing fake news that they believe is true. So that's what misinformation. Now, disinformation is a little bit more nefarious. This is sharing false, misleading, distorted, or isolated factual information deliberately with the intent to cause harm or damage. So the person who's typing out their disinformation and sharing it with the world, they know it's fake and they are doing it for a purpose. So disinformation is definitely more potentially harmful and nefarious. And if you wanted to, you could look up the National Academy's Scientist's Guide for Countering Misinformation. All right, so let's dive into why do people share it? Why do people share mis or disinformation? Well, this just came out. Let's see, end of November, so less than a month ago. And this is the Journal of Science, which I was telling you just a little while ago is kind of a big deal. It's one of the best places to publish if you're a scientist. There was a study that showed that misinformation and disinformation, as mentioned previously, is often created to spark strong emotion such as anger or fear. And misinformation exploits anger or fear, and that strong emotion will propel or prompt people to share that information. So people are often sharing it because of that such strong emotion that they want to share it with other people because they want to share what they just read so that other people are now made aware of what they read. So that's, again, based on that checklist number one, check your emotions, right? So that's one of the drivers here. So this article was great. It's not surprising, but it was important. Okay, so this is the important part for us getting ready for the holiday dinner table. What do you do if family or friends share mis or disinformation online, or I would even say in conversation? Well, this is not necessarily easy, but talking to family and friends or neighbors or whoever is communicating with you about false or misleading content might help them to think twice about the information. That they're taking at face value and just sharing because of that emotional outpouring. Now, while every scenario is different, there are some best practices that can help your conversation stay respectful and civil and make your interactions worthwhile. And then I wanted to call your attention to having difficult and productive conversations is not something that we are taught to do, and most people will avoid them. Okay, most people avoid them. We're not taught to do this, which we should be. And most people will prefer just to avoid it or ignore it. So some of the things we're seeing that these are all questions that I got during the pandemic. How are we sure the virus wasn't made in a lab? Does 5G cause coronavirus? Do you even know anyone who's had COVID? Have you seen pandemic? Like all these things. Every single one of those questions and like 100 more, I have been asked and have had conversations with people. So what I'm going to encourage you all to do now is the time to learn to engage respectfully. We don't have time to sit back. We can't do that anymore. So it's a call to action. I want you all to be brave and I want you to engage in difficult conversation. And I am going to give you the tools to be able to do that. So this comes from the News Literacy Project, these 6 tips. So we're going to go through one at a time, the 6 tips as a guide of how to speak up without starting a showdown. That's actually the name of the article that I have referenced here at the bottom. So 6 tips. First tip, be civil and empathetic. So you're always going to want to have an empathetic and respectful tone. I would avoid condescending. You want it to be empathetic and respectful. You also don't want to be judgmental, and you don't want to tell someone they're just wrong. Being judgmental or telling people they're wrong doesn't work. If you think about when someone's judgmental towards you, or if they tell you you're just wrong, you usually don't say, "Oh, yes, thank you for judging me." And yes, thank you for telling me I'm wrong. Usually it's defensive. People are defensive. So try to be empathetic and respectful and avoid being judgmental or just saying straight away, you're wrong. And if a person replies with like aggressive or sarcastic language, do not be the same. Just again, be empathetic and respectful. Try to keep it even keeled as best you can. Second tip, take your time. Fight off that response to just throw your email out into the into the internet with your first thoughts. It's tempting, but you need to like step back. Now, maybe you can type it up, but don't hit send, right? You might also want to research the claim that's being shared or talked about. Like this is obviously if it's being shared online. If it's in conversation, I mean, you could actually probably look it up on your phone at the same time, like, hey, hold that thought, let's look it up together. But you're going to want to research the claim, find reputable fact-checking organizations and credible sources that you could share. So that's the second tip. Take your time. Third, find common ground. This sometimes can be challenging, but put yourself in that person's shoes. Like, why did they post this? Did they have good intentions? Like, is this something that they're believing that they want someone else to just learn about? Is this false information coming from a good place? Consider pointing out shared concerns or feelings in your response. Like, hey, I was thinking about that too, but X, Y, and Z. And then the third bullet here is remember that people are sharing these things because of that strong emotional reaction. So you can kind of focus on their maybe good intentions, like, hey, I know you're trying to share this because this concerns you. This concerns me too, but let's kind of work on it together. So trying to find common ground, again, keeping in mind everybody is trying to make the best decisions for themselves and their family. They may be led astray by this information, and we just have to think that everyone has good intentions for the healthcare decisions they're making. The fourth, lay out the facts. Rather than simply posting a link to a fact check site, you could potentially summarize a couple of like the main findings to debunk it. If you do this though, and this has happened to me, don't let the conversation get derailed by people debating attacks on the facts that you're citing. Like, oh, the Science Journal, that's no big deal. Like that's fake news. Or, some reputable source that I'm citing that people will be like, well, that's not real. So you don't want to get led down that kind of path. You could, if you did put in fact-checking examples or organizations, you might want to put in a few just so like, oh, if you don't agree with this one, you can look at this one. Just to kind of bulk up your fact-checking. Fifth, public or private. If this is on like say Facebook or Twitter or something, how do you want to post your response? Do you want to respond to everybody so everyone on that thread or feed can see the public comment? Now, while that's going to maybe reach a bigger audience, like all the people, think about would that maybe embarrass the person or make them feel like you're judging them? Because it might be more appropriate in some situations to have like a private conversation, like message just them. And if you do leave a private message instead of going public, like reply all, you could leave a comment that's kind of like just a little bit making people think twice, like, I'm not sure about this. So that there would be a little seed of doubt planted, but you wouldn't be publicly calling out the whole thing. Maybe you would send a private message. And then the sixth tip is be patient and persistent. Research does show that people are more likely to believe fact checks or information from people they know. Fact checking you can think of as an ongoing debate rather than like a fight that you're going to win. I'm going to tell you an example as an immunologist and science communicator, pro-vaccine advocate. It is public health and defending science to me is a marathon plus an Ironman plus a triathlon. Any event you can think of, it's ongoing. It's never ending. I have conversations with people all the time. I'll talk about vaccines over and over and over. So it's not a fight to win, it's a conversation that's ongoing. Um, and then with this patient and persistent, if the person is unconvinced, you can respectfully continue to plant these seeds of doubt to prompt maybe reflection, even if it's not in that person, maybe somebody who's reading the post, and I've had this happen on Facebook, they'll reach out to me and say, I know that you're an immunologist and a scientist, and I was reading this person's post and I was agreeing with it. And then I saw that you were kind of skeptical. Can you tell me more about that? So I've had a lot of a lot of success with that, planting seeds of doubt and then prompting more thought and reflection, even if it's just in the private space. Okay, so here's the review of the 6 tips. So be civil and empathetic, take your time, find common ground, lay out the facts. Should it be public or private? You might want to think about that, and then be patient and persistent. And then the last thing I'm going to leave you with here is helpful phrases for getting started. So again, to speak up without starting a showdown. If this was on Facebook or something, you could say, oh, I saw this and initially thought it could be true too, but, and then kind of, lay a little seed of doubt. Do you know where this information came from? How did you find out about this? That could be helpful. If this is an image, this image or meme or article seems a little shocking. I'm skeptical it's real. That could just plant a seed of doubt. This image looks like it may not actually be what it seems. Here's a link to another version of that same image, which shows something different. What do you think about that? And then finally, I talk about this all the time. Figuring out what's true online can be overwhelming, but I did a little digging and I thought you might want to know that this looks a little misleading and here's why. So that's an example. Okay. So now you're experts at how to distinguish facts from fake news and how to engage in conversations that are maybe challenging or difficult. We're all going to be called to action. We won't back away. So I just wanted to end with saying thank you. If you have any questions, ideas, or thoughts for the chat, and then if you wanted to check out more, I have a personal Wix website that tells you all about my teaching and science communication and community outreach and things like that if you want to use the QR code. But with that, I think that's it. So thanks everyone for listening and hopefully useful information maybe. But do we have any, I can stop share as well. Are there any questions for us? I can call up the chat. Well, I don't see anything in the chat.
Let's
Oh,
see,
man.
Dr. Bernard, I have some Q&As. It looks like multiple thank yous and really interesting comments. Are there any other resources that you didn't mention that we should also look at?
Oh my gosh, there probably are some other resources. Um, that news literacy organization, I think that to me is one of the go-tos. They also will have references to other resources that you can look at. Um, Again, this is where it's tricky. You need to make sure it's a reputable source. Um, but yeah, I think there are certainly more out there. I see the news literacy as kind of a first stop. I think I mentioned that Fast and Frugal Heuristic from Science, the Journal of Science. Um, there would be a few reputable ones. So I'm sorry, I'm not giving you any more specific, but go to news literacy first, and they will have a plethora of other resources as well. So it's a great question. Um, any other? Hmm, I don't see I don't see any other questions. I'm really glad that you all came. I left plenty of time for questions. Maybe it was just crystal clear, you know.
Lots
Do you
of
have
comments,
any?
really interesting, and looks like we'll have a question someone's typing in, but
Yeah, okay, great. Awesome.
just a lot of everyone saying really helpful, and thank you, which
Yeah,
I
and I
can.
think there will be a link to the video recording of this for people. And then I would also be happy to share slides with anyone if that would be useful as well. Because I did put links to some of the different resources that I used. Ooh, here comes a question.
Yeah, there's a really good one. Can you see it, Dr. Bernard?
Yeah. So, this is a question. One of the coolest things about science is that it requires a lot of back and forth. How, in these difficult conversations, do you leave room for what we don't yet know? That is a great question. By the way, I believe that comes from the editor of the St. Paul Pioneer Press, who I invited to come to this webinar. But so thanks for coming. That's a great question. One of the things I will often do is I will let people know about science is always evolving and how we use data and evidence to drive what we say and how we talk about our findings. And that we will often say things like our data suggests or strongly suggests that X, Y, and Z. Typically, with science, we don't say things like it's always this way or this is the way it is. You could say this is what we know now. However, moving forward with more information or more data or more scientific findings, things may change, like things are always evolving. So that's a really good point, and I often will bring in the scientific process and how science evolves. That was really particularly important around the pandemic because people were asking, like, well, you guys said we shouldn't wear a mask, and then you said we should. And I was like, yes, I know, and we should have said we're still working on figuring out if it's a respiratory virus and if you can catch it through droplets in the air and things like that. Because in the beginning, people just didn't want to say wear that mask. It's absolutely essential until we had evidence. So talking about how science is dynamic and evolving and can change is really important. So I agree. You can always add that into the conversation. It's helpful, and I do that quite a bit. So there's another, it looks like Caitlin wrote, a comment. Sometimes I use sites like YouTube to increase curiosity and like further into something with better sources. Absolutely. Caitlin, I look at YouTube also. I will tell you, I will look to YouTube to figure out how to like get the ring or earring out of my drain, like to remove the U-pipe from my sink, or I will learn about, recipes, or I'll learn more about like car mechanics and things like that, just because I am curious also. So yeah, absolutely agree. You can find a lot of amazing information on YouTube. Absolutely. I don't think YouTube is a bad thing. I just don't think we should see it as like an actual evidence-based source, from like the one video that you watch. So absolutely agree. I see a comment or a question from Marnie. Thank you. Timely presentation as this was a hot discussion at work today. How to address non-medical colleagues with challenging fake news opinions. Yes, that's exactly why we had this webinar. Hopefully some of the tips were useful to you. I would say always start from a point of view that the people who are reading the information, they're trying to make the best decisions for themselves and their family. And like I said, they might see anger or fear or sadness in some of the things that they read, and that emotion might drive them to believe what they're reading is real. So I will always lead with, yeah, I understand your fear or your anger of this, and let's talk about it. So absolutely. It's tough though. It's tough, and that's why these are challenging and difficult. But I feel like everyone here is up to the task of we're not afraid of difficult things, and that's why we're here. So we can do this, and we have to do this. Moving forward, we have no choice. Another question I saw from Linda. Do you study the psychological pull of fake health news conspiracy theories or know someone who does? I do not. Myself, if you shoot me an email, Linda, I know you and I have talked before on email. If you shoot me an email, I'll try to come up with some names for you. Um, but I'm sure I can guarantee that there are people that do that. I just personally don't know them off the top of my head. But yeah, that's a whole thing now, for sure. Looks like another question. What suggestions do you have for us concerning challenges with the incoming administration's anti-science stance, RFK Jr., anti-vax, et cetera, rhetoric? What can we do on a daily basis with boots on the ground? So that's great. I have recently joined with about 1,000 scientists across the country in something called Defending Public Health, and we're gonna start moving forward, same kind of thing. Um, as much as you can, engage in those conversations respectfully and civilly, doing what you can, write things up, put things on social media, have those conversations, write op-eds, put things, do all the things that you can because we need more evidence-based science out there. The more that we get out there, the less the noise will take over. So that's what I would suggest. Just kind of get started on that kind of thing. If you use the QR code to my Wix website, you'll see I have a lot of science communication. I engage in a lot of those things all the time. So I might recommend trying to do some of those things if you can. Oh, okay. Do we have time for one more question?
I think we have time for one more. That AI is definitely an
I
intriguing
know.
question in
Oh,
creating.
Allison, yeah. Any perspective on AI, so artificial intelligence and its potential role in fake news? Yeah, it definitely has a role. I mean, we saw that in the recent election. There was a lot of like photos, videos that were fake. I mean, that's just something that unfortunately we're going to have to deal with. So I've been going to a lot of different like online conferences and webinars to learn more about that, and it's something that we're just going to have to deal with. But again, look for reputable sources, see if more things agree with what you're reading or seeing or hearing. But yeah, I think that's something we're going to have to deal with. I just don't think that's going to go away. And AI just, I think has a lot of really good purposes too, but it clearly is going to good and bad. So great question. It's 6.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, Dr. Bernard. That was an awesome and timely presentation, like some of those comments said. So on behalf of myself, our attendees, and the CU Anschutz Alumni Associations, I want to thank you for sharing your time and expertise with us tonight. Before we close this evening, there's about to be a slide to pop up with a couple of events coming up for our alumni community, and we'll share these events both also as well via email. And thanks everyone again for joining us and tuning in. And thanks for everything, for all you guys do as healthcare professionals and joining this kind of talk so that we can be that boots on the ground, if you will. So have a good evening, everyone, and have a great holiday season.
Thank you for having me.